You've decided you're going to work on a De Novo project for your company instead of a 510K project. But who are you going to hire to help you manage this project? I'm not talking about which consulting firm are you going to hire to actually prepare the 510K or De Novo. I'm talking about actually managing the project itself. And then you might think that's an obvious question. Oh, I'm just going to hire uh, a vice president of R&D, or I'm going to have my whoever's in charge of the design team. They're going to run the whole thing. But that might not be your best approach. One of the companies I worked at back in 2012, that company had a very experienced director of engineering that managed the design team and the risk management team, and he was very, very good at it. Had lots of experience with lots of medical device companies, knew his trade very well, but he didn't actually manage the project. He hired a guy right out of school, very young engineer that didn't have a lot of experience, but he hired that person strictly for the purpose of project management to develop a Gantt chart for the project, keep it up to date, and he trained that person as he was going along. Because he was so experienced, he didn't need somebody with a lot of experience, but he needed somebody whose sole job was to keep track of all the balls that are in the air and let him know when something wasn't right. That's the key. Whoever the boss is, the CEO, the vice president, the director of engineering, whoever is responsible for the project doesn't need to manage everything, but they do need somebody who is going to let them know when something isn't right. So, when you're thinking about why am I making a big deal about De Novo versus 510Ks? First of all, the De Novo is going to be a lot bigger budget. It's going to be a longer project. So inherently, you're going to have a burn rate over a longer period of time. You're going to probably have a clinical study, which most 510Ks don't have. And you're probably going to be developing new technology. And new technology usually goes along with that a lot of iterative prototyping and developing a new production process that other people, you can't just go to a contract manufacturer and say, make this for me necessarily. There's some startup and development costs where they're trying to develop that technology for you before they can even put it in production. So time is longer, cost is greater, and the overall complexity of the project, because you've got clinical studies in all likelihood and you have more hurdles that you have to pass through than a normal 510K project that's like some other product that's been there and done that before. You sometimes have to figure out what the hurdle is you have to get through before you can even come up with a plan for how you're going to get past it. So you have more milestones, they're more complex, you may not know how to tackle them, you may not even know they exist until they get you. So you need to make sure you have somebody helping you manage your product or your project as a whole. So what would be my first approach? I'd be looking at one of two disciplines to help me. Number one, I would think about quality engineers. Quality engineers are really good at doing statistical analysis, analytical, have a lot of the skills to look at different disciplines, cross-disciplinary skills, and they're very good at assessing suppliers, which is a big part of this job. The other role I would look at is supplier quality manager, or like a supply chain manager. Those two functions, I think, they usually work together closely together, and both of those functions would do a good job of project management. But if you have an experienced team and you can coach them along the way, and you want to bring in somebody that's green and just have them be responsible just for keeping those Gantt charts up to date, you could take that approach too. But let's review some of the things that they're going to have to keep track of, and some of the things that might be a little different from your normal project. So number one, new technology. If you're developing new technology, new materials, miniaturizing things, putting them in an environment where they haven't been before, having them interface with new technology as well, looking at new diseases, these are things that might be quite different, and you're going to have to develop that technology. So you need to have people that are comfortable with prototyping and working with vendors that prototype instead of just let me give you a purchase order for this and you make a whole lot of it, like thousands of them. That's not necessarily what you're doing when you're developing new technology. You need that prototype stage and lots of it, maybe iterative prototypes over a course of a year, potentially. Next, along with that is going to go a lot more supplier sourcing. You're going to have to identify a new supplier to provide the prototype units to develop the technology, and they might not be the ideal company to commercialize it. So then you might have to transfer that technology to a new vendor and coordinate that. So you got to actually identify two vendors instead of one. Never mind the concept of let's have a redundant supply chain. That's often not even practical at the beginning stages of a new de novo product. So think in terms of who am I going to have help me in the short term and who's going to help me long term, and am I going to have to bring this in house? Next, the design and the development team. This is a really important part. You want to make sure that you have a design team that knows how to perform the design reviews, knows how to manage a design plan, keep it up to date, keeps on task with all the deliverables, identifies things that are missing from the design documentation and then your DHF. And you also want to make sure that they are also in parallel with that performing all the risk management activities. What about the human factors process? All those things occur in parallel. Next, clinical studies. You're going to have a lot of activities getting to the point where you have something that's past your internal verification testing. Then you have to go outside and do validation testing. And with de novo products, it's not always capable, it's not always possible to do this on a cadaver model or an animal model. Sometimes you have to actually do the study in humans. So when you have that situation, you're going to have to go out there and manage a clinical study, which usually small companies, they'll outsource to a CRO, but that's the expensive way to go. So you might need to bring on a clinical research coordinator to manage your clinical study that has the ability to write a clinical study protocol, can hire some CRAs to go do site selections and site audits to make sure that each of the sites is trained in following procedures and your protocol. You need somebody that can handle the IRBs and get your product through the IRB. And if you have a significant risk device, you're going to have to actually submit an IDE to the FDA, an investigational device exemption, and get them to approve it. So there's a lot of things that are involved in the process of getting a clinical study through. And you might even be doing like an adaptive study design where you're not sure how many subjects you're going to have. You do some preliminary estimates, but you might change that number with some statistical calculations at various points along the way before you finalize on what is the actual number that you're going to terminate the study at. Clinical studies have gotten more sophisticated over time. You have to coordinate with a biostatistician. You have to be validating your database. You have to make sure you're collecting the data in a timely manner. You have to make sure you're monitoring all the sites. Otherwise, that data could become invalid. You have to be getting your informed consent from all your patients. You have to make sure that you have financial disclosures for all the investigators. You have to make sure that you've registered with the clinicaltrials.gov. You might be preparing documentation for a paper or a peer-reviewed journal article. A lot of stuff going on with clinical studies. Not to mention you're spending a ton of money and you need to keep the clinical centers supplied with product that you're not making any revenue on. So you have to keep that supply chain that's brand new and really green, supplying good product that you can use in your clinical study. Don't forget, you're a new company, new technology. There's going to be patent applications. There might be utility patents. There might be different types of patents that you have. You might also be looking at trade secrets. You might be looking at which countries you're going to be getting those patents in. So you need to manage the whole legal process. It's complicated for a device that is making a little twist of a difference with an existing technology, but think how complicated it is when you're developing brand new technology from scratch. It's much more complicated and might take you quite a while, and you have a lot of money at stake that you have to protect. And that's really part of the value of your company is that intellectual property portfolio that you're developing. So that has to be managed well, and you can't say, well, I'll give that to the CEO because the CEO is going in and doing fundraising to pay for it all. And you can't give it to the director of engineering because the director of engineering is managing the design project. So who are you going to give it to? And you have to vet which patent attorney do I need, and you have to make sure people are getting the information to the patent attorney so they can hit the filing deadlines that they're looking for and make sure the review is being done properly before any patent submissions go in. Another thing to think about is reimbursement consultants. A lot of companies will say, well, we don't have to worry about that. There already is a CPT code for that. But for most de novo products, there isn't an existing CPT code. And even if there were a CPT code, doesn't mean you can use it for your product. That could be a CPT code only for that other company competitor product, and yours is enough different that you're doing a de novo. It's not necessarily going to apply to your product. Besides, if you're going for a de novo, you're going to have to show a clinical risk benefit that favors your product over the competitor product, and you have a different set of risks. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a de novo. So in those cases, of course, there is the need for doing reimbursement clinical studies to make sure you can get the funding or get paid back and reimbursed for your product by insurance carriers, and you don't want to have to wait 2 years down the road to gather enough data. You'd ideally like a breakthrough device designation, so you got to have a strategy for that. And even if you don't get your breakthrough device designation, you still want to figure out how you're going to get reimbursed, and in what regions. Are you going to be doing this nationally or more likely in a regional fashion, which means multiple times over? And then, of course, hiring a regulatory or quality consulting firm like ours. These are all pieces that you're going to have to manage. There's a huge budget at stake here. So if we were doing a 510K project, you might be able to get away with $250,000 budget. But that's not even going to cover your clinical study budget for a de novo product. And whenever you have to develop new technology, new vendors, new manufacturing process, there's a bigger cost for that. So you're not just saying, make me one of these. Your company is going to have to hire vendors to develop the technology before they can make many of them for you. So those first few units might cost you thousands of dollars, even though they might only sell for hundreds of dollars or less in commercialization. So you really need to make sure that you're looking at the cost of this project. For the timeline for this project, a lot of people don't realize how long things take. My classic things I see, we'll just get somebody to make us a plastic injection molded part there. That should only take like 8 weeks. Try again. You'll be lucky to get it in 12 weeks. And I've seen 16 weeks, and vendors often promise one thing and then actually deliver something else. And after you've already put down the money for the mold and you're at the 11th hour waiting for parts, you're not going to go shop for a new vendor and start from scratch. You're just going to whine a lot and wait. That's what you're going to do. The next thing, what about if I have to do some testing? So software validation, that takes a while, has to be done before you go into electrical safety labs. You have to do human factors testing before you go into an electrical safety lab. You also have to have your risk management file before you go into an electrical safety lab. You also need to do your EMC testing before you go into an electrical safety lab. Why? Because if you make any changes to pass EMC testing, you need that done before you do the electrical safety. Otherwise, you'll have to redo your electrical safety twice. So all those things are critical path items that have to be done before you get to the electrical safety, which is going to be an 8-week test. And I can do my sterilization validation in, let's say, 8 to 10 weeks, but that doesn't mean the company that's a new contract sterilizer has an open window just waiting for me. They might not have a place in the queue for me for 16 weeks or longer. And you're going to validate the sterilization process beforehand. That might be a delay just because you're not an existing customer. So you get at the end of the line. They're full. EO sterilizers are not waiting for business. They're trying to cope with the amount of business that they have because they're a dying breed. There aren't many EO sterilizers out there, and people want to use them. So you can expect that to be a problem. And last but not least, okay, we talked about electrical safety. We talked about sterilization validation, but you also need to get enough product in your hands so you can actually do the testing. And of course, all of this has to be done before an IRB signs off that you can actually do your study. So there are lots of milestones that have to be occurring. Now, let's say you pass all of that with flying colors. You've managed it perfectly. Every single thing went off without a hitch. Well, now we submit our submission to the FDA, and the FDA says 150 days. Try again. They average 390 days in 2022. 390 days for a review of De Novo. So there were some delays in there where they were looking for more information. You have to manage the FDA review process too. One more set of milestones for you to manage. Now, you have your all the length of time this is going to take, all the critical path items that you're going to have to deal with. What about your budget? $250,000 isn't going to be the budget for this. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar budget here. So you need one person whose full-time job is to go raise funds. That's probably your CEO, and they're going to be using the board of directors to help them. And they're going to be putting in some of their own money, and they're going to be bringing in friends and family money, and they're going to bring in angel investors, and they have to manage all that and answer questions and pitch for each successive round of money they're raising, because they're not talking about just one round. They might have a pre-seed round with this friends and family. They have a seed round. They have an A round. They have a B round. You might not get to actually submit something to the FDA until C or D round. Please don't get to your E or F round. You won't stay in business if you go that far out. But you should expect you're going to have multiple rounds of investment with multiple, increasingly higher dollar amounts, and somebody's got to manage that. And you can't count on them for doing all these other things too. So project management is the single most important task or function that you have to do to keep your De Novo on track. And that might not be one of your higher ups. That might be somebody that's right out of school, and their sole job is to let me know when something isn't right. If you're looking for suggestions on tools to use, please look at any of our videos where we've actually shown you some project management tools. I know we have one on our page for turnkey quality system. It's Asana. That's a tool that our firm uses to do project management. We use it for managing our sales funnel. We use it for managing all our proposals and invoices. We use it for actual project management on the 510K projects. Asana is the tool we go to all the time. There's a free version, so you can do most of it with that. But if you want to build a Gantt chart, you have to do the paid version. But all the tasks and sharing it with vendors, you can do that with the free version. It's really powerful, and it synchronizes with your phone as well as your desktop version and communicates with everybody the same version real time. And you can export from an Excel spreadsheet and import the CSV file into Asana. That works as well. And I actually show a video how to do that on our turnkey quality system page. So that's one tool. Microsoft Project is the standard tool that most people will use. That engineer that I talked about back in 2012, that's what they used all the time. Trello is a very popular tool that a lot of people are using. There are a lot of other tools that you can use. Trying to think of other tools. But if you have a suggestion for a tool that I haven't mentioned, please put it in the comments below. And if you think this would be helpful to somebody else, whether it's for a De Novo project or for a traditional 510K submission, please share the link down below. I think it'll help people with project management and get some ideas of how to approach it a little differently. And if you have any questions about De Novos specifically, next week we're going to be posting a brand new post specifically to De Novo submissions. So I hope you take a look at our blog posting and subscribe to the blog blog email list if you have not already done it. Thank you and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.